Come, Spirit of God, calm our spirits and talk to our hearts and minds. Give us thoughts brought on from you and desires inspired by you. May improve our ministry and be wholly open to you and to all the inspirations and guidance that you have for us as we try to cooperate with you for the salvation of the souls that you bring to us. You may have, in the centenary year of the First World War, the end of it, or the beginning of it, last year, 1914, 1915, in Italy, it was later getting there. It's 2 years ago, isn't it? Time has passed. You may have come across some of the witnesses, the testimonies that came from the trenches, some of the things that survived those horrible years of butchery, and in particular the importance of the priest in those infernal episodes. They were extremely important. The troops had great respect for them. In the French army, they were not exempt either military service, so they had about 2,000 priests at least fighting. But these also, in a sense, indirectly, healed the anti-clerical movement that had been in France just prior to the war. Souls were important, and even though in our day we are not fighting each soul in that form of trying to jump across trenches to anoint them before they go, we are nevertheless in an invisible battle for souls, which is every bit as important. Just to be aware that therefore our time is every bit as important as that of those war chaplains. And the Second World War also had many testimonies of things that would happen. And the soul, when it comes to the end, is before eternity, which can go that way or that way, according to where the last breath comes, and what the disposition of the soul is in that last breath, and it can be altered in a few seconds. The enemy of the soul knows it well. He has made it such that that is not thought about, that all the rest is thought about in a maximal way: health care, comfort. But have you noticed, if you go around to places where there are many souls in different stages of proximity to that point, what is happening? In the nursing homes of Europe, whereas before in Catholic lands, like Ireland and Italy, one would have a powerhouse of rosaries there. They're still there. Quite often the older people, they have the rosary in their hand. But one is competing now with massively human vegetables, all obliged in hospitals and in institutions of health care to listen to things non-stop from a box. And that box, we know, is infested. So the Church is deprived of that powerhouse of prayer, the prayer of the elderly, and in its place one has contaminated souls, not at all invited to think about what is ahead of them. It's kind of important because rather than ourselves play the game of the enemy of the soul and easily opt for a form of ministry which is respectable, one can go into the heroic form of actually head-on and hand-to-hand warfare. That means actually looking for souls at that point, spending free time just being present to them, available to them. It's kind of important that we're available to them as priests, and then letting the Lord work upon them, having armed ourselves with prayer. Much happens actually at the deathbed of a person about to go into the beyond, usually if the soul, and that's the point, is lucid, that soul is lucid also to what is ahead, and the defences are lowered somewhat. So one can do a lot of good if one finds a soul still lucid at that point. I had a friend who worked as a nurse in a place of preparation for death, essentially a nursing home, but many people would die, and she many times would have that experience of what she referred to as handing them over to God. Mine is the last face that they see. I hand them over to God. In that case, it's a human warmth, but the human and the divine are closely intertwined, and we need to cultivate our humanity. As priests, we are all the time handling pain anyway, is it not true? If we're truly engaged in ministry, a high proportion of our life is spent sharing pain. A burden shared is a burden halved. So we need to be extra delicate souls, aware of how much people are hurting, and able somehow to enter into that pain. One enters into pain on tiptoe, and the great healer is the listening ear. At times, pain is so great that words are too easy, and listening is the great ministry of healing some pain. Why? Because the fact that we didn't have an easy answer gives to understand that we had a notion of the pain and its intensity. An easy answer is the last thing that somebody wants. They will say to themselves, he hasn't a clue. But we've dismissed the problem and gone on. To be able to sit with a person and let that person say it all is a great ministry in itself. And when it comes to people about to die, there may not be a lot possible with regard to conversation anywhere, but there are ways and means of communication which the Lord has given us in our cultivated humanity, which are universal and perfectly understood. If even an animal understands bodily language, how much more will a human being? And warmth of body and soul passes quite often far more in the clasp of a hand than in a noisy and wagging tongue. So we need to cultivate the means of communication on every level that we have, for that could be the difference between heaven and hell. In the 13th chapter of the Apocalypse, we find this strange creature coming through, the beast. It emerges from the sea. But then we find this strange scene. The dragon had handed over to it his own power and his throne and his immense authority. Last week I was talking to a young man who was very well informed, far better than I was, in Italy, and he was able to give me some knowledge of things I wasn't fully aware of because of how much he'd known directly or indirectly what was going on. Apparently, his estimation was, anyway, that modern society is nearly totally in the hands of what the Lord himself referred to as the Prince of this world. And he explained how. He explained many things from the American dollar, which he analysed before me using a smartphone, to all that's out there in pressure put on society universally, at least in civilized society. Apparently, the infiltration of Masonic forces is something that we haven't a clue about. It's so well orchestrated. And partly the enemy of the soul is able to have the success that he has precisely because of the laziness, essentially, of those who, in actual fact, are responsible for being the defense. We are responsible. We don't actually do what we're meant to do. We do not speak, we do not warn, we do other things, and we're frightfully polite. There was, and is, a whole channel on YouTube done from America about what is going on with regard to Islamic infiltration, and the main person doing it, who's very well read, explains that there are two things which favour hugely that specific onslaught. One is political correctness, and the other is ignorance. And that is why this particular very good broadcaster on YouTube is very clear and keen on getting ordinary people in the West to be fully aware of what they're not aware of, because until recently it wasn't really an issue. Now, the question of the infiltration of sinister forces is something that, as priests, we have to be aware of. I mentioned in passing how it's come to the surface recently, again, that in Ireland, those preparing people for ordination in the only seminary that we have were clearly giving preferential treatment to a certain type of candidate and making it difficult for others, was part of something which is a huge pattern, if one looks carefully, on many parts of the Christian world right now. The element of having grown out of certain things. Even actually on the level of the people, partly because of the example of priests, people think that such practices as the rosary in some areas is of its time. If, on the contrary, the people, when they find themselves in a meeting or on a journey in a car or whatever it might be with a priest who at one point spontaneously says, let's now say the rosary, and does it in such a way that it is prayed with a little thought between each decade and even a little chant put in here or there, Ave Maria, whatever it might be, will that not immediately not be a noisy sermon, but a message which will have its effect? One can talk about the weather and football any time. All time is important, and we talk all the time with our being, our bearing, our language, clean language, and these things which are thrown into our day. Also, when we go into a home, or wherever it might be, if we eat as animals at a trough, it is one thing. If we elevate it as the Lord would have done, as St. Joseph would have done, in the atmosphere of Israel, to almost a sacramental, bringing God into the equation, it is a quiet sermon, which rubs off on people. We are all the time preaching. And so, these are immediate messages that we can give all through our day. When we pass a child, we can simply give a little smile, but we can also bless that child. We have power and authority. That can happen to many people, actually, and sometimes that will speak volumes. We have power in our hand and we don't use it. Now, I want to bring to the fourth some things which are quite startling. The putter together of this combination has unfortunately died. It was a holy priest in Italy, Father Pellegrino Maria Ernetti. His dates are 1925 to 1994. He was a Benedictine monk in the Abbey of San Giorgio Maggiore in Venice. So he was a well-known man of God who would draw people by the hundred without looking for them. They would just sail over and find him in his monastery. He would pray with them, and he had also the faculties of an exorcist. He was known for his biblical and theological studies, knowledge of various sciences, and he had a great discernment of spirits. But before he died, an interview took place which was not without significance, because a good journalist wanted to interview him and collect bits of information from him while he was still lucid. Vincent Speziale was the interviewer. Now, I'm summarizing this greatly. This interviewer, was aware that he'd spent many years in hand-to-hand combat with the darker side of things, and he wanted to know whether he had sussed out over the years any likes or dislikes of the other crowd, the dark side. And unexpectedly, there was this immediate reaction from the elderly priest. Yes, indeed. And he regretted that he'd waited so long to put this together. And he also regretted that other exorcists had not done the same. For apparently, over a life of exorcism, certain things do emerge, certain constants amongst the variables, and these were to be noted. The demons are obliged under exorcism eventually to say certain things they don't want to. Why? Because they are also creatures, and in the last resort, like ourselves, under the authority of the High King, and the priest has that authority. So, things that over the years had come out, and he notes them. Indeed, it comes out rather like a catechism in reverse. So I'll just quote the titles. I won't go into each one, but even the fact that they are put as titles and then he expands each one is enough for us to have some idea of the way in which we're handling a hand-to-hand combat on every front on a daily basis. So, to answer the question, what the devil likes, the host in the hand comes through. Now, this also came through in the series of very dramatic exorcisms in Germany, Anneliese Michel, which eventually ended in the death of that lassie. But the things were pushed from strange sources. And there are reasons for them, of course. Loss of faith, availability of the host for satanic worship, hosts dropping to the ground and then trampled upon. Above all, education given to children, because in practice a child who receives something in the same way as he receives any ordinary food will get one message. A child who from the beginning is given to understand that it's so different that it has a special way of being received will have another message which will stay forever. These are all things the demon knows full well. Priests dressed as street cleaners, camouflaged. The non-availability of the priest is immediate when he takes away his insignia. They don't have to be noisy, but they're either there or not there. Although actually in France there is the compromise solution of quiet. We are recognizable. But nothing at all is something else. And he notes that it also makes it easier for them to go to places where they shouldn't be. And this one, interesting, the priests and the bishops enrolled in the Freemasonry and in my sects, that's the devil speaking, you would know. Miniskirts, the television. And the demon has a lot to say about this one. So I'll leave it to your imagination. I just add one comment that the Korean artist who some years ago had a strange experience and was shown the beyond, she either died or was given some journey in spirit, but she was a young person who had great gifts of being an artist, able to describe things in painting, was shown the beyond, and she was asked by the Lord before she came back to paint what she'd seen. And one of the scenes that she saw was the link between the television and some kind of infestation of the soul, and she painted it in such a way, and she knew what she was saying because she'd seen these souls there in the place of loss underneath as a result of the use of television, that the demons were coming out of the screen, and as it were stopping them, they were coming out of the screen. So television in itself is an instrument, it's neutral. Now we have to add to that also internet. And years ago, actually, in Italy, when the internet was starting to become a problem, we didn't have it in the monastery, at least at that stage. And he was warning me, he had a doctorate, and he was a clever man. It's not just neutral, he said. He was speaking French. See if I can note. It was kind of, it was strange, because the power of it was something else. The power of the internet is actually huge. So, just warning us, and warning us, because we forget, every time we open internet or into television live, we're opening possibly the jaws of somewhere else. And the demons are in there. It's something we need to be able to handle and control, but not being able to get out of control and be handled and controlled by it, because that's the problem. We're not mature. It's a new problem which humanity has not yet coped with. And the proof is that young people now, even children actually, straight away are addicted to what's in their hand, the smartphone. It's damaged life completely, and actually it damaged student life. If you look at students together now, it's very different from what it was when we were students, where conversation between lectures was important, at coffee. Now they're in their bubble, they're not talking to each other. So they're actually damaged even on the social and psychological level. It's a new form of life. We're becoming a nation, actually a planet, of screen gazers. Every few moments goes into this machine. So in that machine is everything, for better or for worse. So we need to be mature people ourselves, because priests usually are fairly au fait with these modern gadgets. They use them. The discotheques. Now already in the early 90s, I was talking to a well-known preacher in Ireland. He still comes to visit me actually, Father Michael Marr. He's head of the Marymount of Priests in Ireland, a very well-known preacher, and he has one of the old style. And even if a bishop is presiding, he'll preach. But he was warning me way back in the early 90s how discos are very strange places. And actually, if one examines, analyzes what goes on now in present day inner city discos, it's almost an antechamber of the beyond, and you know where. It's almost like a church assembly in reverse, where we've got a kind of disc jockey at the end there, as it were, officiating and inviting them to do things which are actually quite awful. And the whole atmosphere is taking down the defences of these young people, and they're just not fully in possession of their faculties. Add to that the whole drug scene which is often in there, and you've got something hugely powerful for the damaging of these young people by the 100, by the 1,000, and the nights are going there, so they're like zombies the following morning. So as regards church practice, that's gone out the window. So it's a huge victory for you know who. So that's what we're handling young people. That's their world. Divorce, the separation of the married couples. Abortion, the killing of the innocent. Drugs. But above all, I like and I am delighted by those bishops and those priests who deny my existence and my work in the world. So he's not talked about. Is that just neutral? If one starts to talk about him in public, what will happen? One will find criticism, complaints, even on high. Is that just neutral? Politicians who declare themselves Christians. It's interesting in some countries how the Christian card is played, but sometimes what's underneath. Judges and magistrates who are not faithful to what they should be doing. We've had cases in Italy where it has emerged that, for instance, in Naples, the Camorra is able to get away with what it gets away with because of the strange collusion of forces. When even very serious offenders have been found, tiny symbolic sentences being pronounced by the judge and magistrate. What's going on there? Linked, of course, with the whole underground of drugs and what goes with it. The sects. In Italy, you know, by now, after the Catholic Church, the most numerous are the Jehovah's Witnesses. They go from door to door. But actually, this seems to be talking specifically about satanic sects, things which are linked with various forms of masonry. Here is an interesting one, the theologians. He likes the theologians. If one looks at what has gone on in Ireland, one notices that the priests given a lot of airtime are those who have very modern ideas. Interesting. The power of a theologian is something akin to that of somebody who sends out pornographic literature if it's not the correct theology. Okay, like it's some idea. Then what the devil dislikes. All this now is the summing up of things that have come out over years of exorcism, from things admitted under pressure from the demons. Confession. If an exorcist is about to do exorcism, he's advised to go to confession himself. The reason is that if he doesn't, the demon will use the possessed person to reveal his own sins. Once they're confessed and absolved, they don't exist anymore, even for the demon. He can't do it. So, confession. One can form one's people with regard to confession. If it's not happening at all, it's not just social, it might be our own fault. Shortly after ordination, I was given on a regular basis a Sunday Mass outside the monastery in a village on the mountain opposite our own, Seggiano, and I noticed there that it was very different from having to preach once every 7 weeks or so in the Abbey Church of the High Mass on a Sunday, where you have perhaps 500 people before you, but you wouldn't see them ever again. They were tourists, or they were on their way around Italy. Going to a village Sunday after Sunday was quite a different thing. There one had actual power, for good or for bad, And one noticed that over a period, if one gave strong and clear, undiluted messages, certain patterns emerged. And one notable one was people came to confession and so on. And one also could explain what was necessary before one received Holy Communion. It leads to practice. They're not being told, and if they hear things in clearly understandable languages, they will actually pick up and respond. It's our own problem. We're responsible. The Lord has no voice but ours. As the prophet says, we are canes muti, dogs that cannot bark. It favours greatly the game of the other one. And I mentioned the other day how on a Sunday, when I have the public mass there, I go straight into the box. I have confessions before and after, but it makes a big difference. And one is not to be able in the sacristy, but in the confession box, it means that people go there rather than there. And it's quite a different end to the celebration. They actually want to see you, and they make a confession as well, but they see you in the right atmosphere, a sacramental atmosphere, and they get to the point, not talking about the weather. It's kind of different. And one has power there. All ages, small and great, little children, all the rest of it, and even little children come to with their parents on their knees inside the box. But it's a great way of helping people where they want help. There's enough socialization going on already. But the box is a huge weapon. It's where we really are priests. They're individuals, and not just a gathering. Each one is precious. What the devil dislikes? The meal, where you eat the flesh and the blood of that crucified one that I killed. Can't bear it. So they try to attack it. I hate the rosary. Remember now at Fatima, the one thing Our Lady asked for 6 times, that is, at each of the 6 apparitions, was daily recitation of the Holy Rosary. If she said so, she meant so. She could have asked for daily Mass, she didn't. People think the reason is that's one thing that everyone, from the Pope to the pauper, from the intellectual to the child, could do without excuse. The Rosary, well said, is a huge honour against the evil one. And by the way, in exorcism it has appeared that the very object itself has power. The Blessed Rosary does have an effect similar to a crucifix or holy water when placed on a possessed person. The person howls and screams, the devil is inside. That is, the Blessed Rosary is itself sacred and powerful. Couple that with sincere recitation thereof, and we have power that even knows it. Get that thing out of the hand of the simple people. The greatest pain in this period of time for me as a demon are the continual presences, the apparitions of this wicked woman. There's a lot of contestation about this other centre of devotion. But in Africa, when she appears, people aren't quite so fussy. Things happen very quickly in those cultures. But what destroys me even more is the insane obedience to that man dressed in white, who commands in the name of the false Redeemer and of your false Saviour. And there's bad language coming out here from the demon. Then another one, and it's pertinent to where we are today. I am very vexed by those little servants with the head covered who abandon all and everything in order to close themselves within 4 walls, in order to sacrifice all that is beautiful and good for that God that only I have succeeded in defeating. Day and night, they mortified themselves with night prayers and reckless and insubstantial fasting. And on it goes. And by the way, from the inside of the monastic world, I've got some idea of the battle that's gone on since the council years with regard to maintaining certain things. And we know that Paul VI in the early 70s was concerned. We had that general chapter of the Trappists in Rome in that period, and Dom Ignace Gillet went to him. He couldn't hold it together any longer. There was a huge pull between the American houses and the French ones. The Americans were going, except for a few houses, towards a very Benedictine interpretation, while the French were very much on the Jansenist line still. Pope Paul said to stay put and do his best. The problem is that it's difficult to put on paper the actual way in which the purely contemplative world is of any use, because we don't understand it, but the devil does. It's far more persuasive to make it something which makes sense on the level of fraternity and charity and warmth than it is on the level of sacrifice and victimhood. And so come into the cloisters of the world notions such as this. We are together in fraternity, we will share it. And so what is the right of the church as regards about 2.5 hours in the morning and 2.5 hours in the afternoon of manual work, which goes back as far as the Desert Fathers, done in silence, and therefore contemplation. That compared with 2.5 hours in the morning, 2.5 hours in the afternoon of the same work done in recreation mode. It's a big difference which people cannot evaluate, but the devil can. So take away that force of true contemplation, in which instead of many rosaries, many prayers, much intimacy with Jesus and Mary in those cloisters and fields is given over to chit-chat which is not without guilt, criticizing superiors and all that goes with it. That's what happens. That's a victory for you know who. Of course, it will not attract young people, so down the line, the monastery will close. Huge victory. He knows far better than we do how to attack and conquer. And by the way, if the church now has become weakened, it's partly because this invisible powerhouse has been weakened. Before, they were all over the Christian world, cloisters upon cloisters, male and female, of victim souls, who quietly did their work of immolation. Now, where are they? There are a few left, but now the demon has less resistance. He's more free. So the church is not just a society, it is the mystical body, and we fight the forces of the evil one with spiritual forces, not chit-chat. And then there are my real fierce and relentless persecutors. They are those who are called exorcists. What an ugly breed, what a disgrace in the world. Fortunately, there are still few, very few, because I dissuade the bishops from nominating them. Does that sound familiar? So, that's what I'm against. Just to be aware, we only see the tip of the iceberg, but the battle is on, and we cannot fight it unless we're somewhat aware of the stratagem of the enemy. It's every bit as serious as the Second World War.